G'day and welcome. My name is James. I'm one of the ministers in the All Saints Network, a network of Anglican churches in the north of Tasmania. I think it's really important to understand, particularly from Charles Taylor, that when he speaks about secular, he's not speaking about the opposite of faith, right? So he's not speaking about this dichotomy or this separation. You've got secular and faith, just like you've got rational and objective and religious, right? He's just simply talking about the fact that that you can't take a belief in society or belief in a culture as a default anymore. There's no default when it comes to belief. So that really is this secular three that he's talking about. This has now become the default worldview of the West. It's the default worldview of how Australians live their lives, and it's true across the modern West. And it's played itself out in different ways. So I think David Williams. So there'll be a link in this. David Williams wrote a series of about 6 articles, I think, over in 2020. Kind of unpacking a lot of this, and in some senses, some of what we're doing is tracking some of this. And I'm going to quote him directly, I think, in episode 2 or 3. But he kind of explains it in the way that, in secular one, this is how it's played out, right? In secular one, you had the sacred and the secular living alongside one another. They got along well. They lived together. The priests and the nuns, they lived in their sphere, and they did their sacred things, and the butchers and the blacksmiths and the seamstresses, they lived alongside in their secular space, and they did secular things. And what happened is that as the reformers, as the Reformation kind of broke out, this idea was challenged. It was like, well, hang on a second, God is present, and God is interested. God is present everywhere, and he's interested in everything. And he's not just interested in the special religious people doing the sacred things. He's just as interested in the blacksmith and the milkmaid doing their secular things. And one of the big things that the Reform was doing was to critique this divide between these two realms of secular and sacred. And because God was everywhere and interested in everything, that meant that actually all of our activity mattered to God. It was all valuable. It was all worthy. It was all potential worship. And because everything you do, you could do for the glory of God, right? But this conviction, this belief around that created a tension, right? Because the reality is, and I know this as a human today, right? It's very hard to live all of your life for God, fully engaged all the time, right? It's very hard to do that. You can try, like it's a good thing to try, but the easier option is to actually not engage at all with God any of the time. And if you do that, of course, then you can stop worrying about feeling guilty when you're trying to live for God, and you realize that you're not, and you don't have to carry the shame that comes from recognizing again that you've fallen short, etc. You can just jettison the whole thing, right? Surely that's a simpler, easier way to live. But as a consequence, what happens, I think, over time is that living for God is replaced with living for yourself. Living for the good of others and the flourishing of others, the world, I think, is replaced with living with the flourishing of yourself, for the flourishing of yourself, for your own end game. And that really is the creation of, or the establishment of, a secular culture. And when we're talking about a secular culture, again, we're not talking about the absence of belief in God. We're not saying that therefore everybody stops believing in God. It's just that the prevailing cultural wind is there's no need for God. There's no need for anything spiritual. If you want that, that's fantastic. You can go for it, but it's not required. So don't worry about it. And when that happens, I think there's a shift in meaning, and there's a shift in how you get meaning and purpose in your life. So what Taylor actually calls in his book a sense of fullness. Okay, he says everyone has this innate desire for fullness. So you stop looking for fullness in external things, principally 500 years ago in God and in understanding the world through the lens of God and bringing flourishing to the world as an extension of God's work. You kind of replace that, you start looking for that, and you start looking for fullness, flourishing within yourself. So Taylor argues that in the 21st century, the way I live in this secular age, and again, I say that, and even then I can't help but think of, right, my default was still think of somehow this secular age is devoid of faith, or the cutting off of faith. It's not it's just living within an age in which faith's redundant. It's not excluded, it's not banished, it's just redundant. So not necessary. But in light of that, then life is all about being authentic to the person that I am. Who I am is not something, that existential question that we used to wrestle with. Who am I? Well, the answer is you're not something that you have to discover anymore, because sometimes if God's made you a certain way or shaped you to be a particular kind of person or etc., actually who you are is who you want to be. I think it was the alternate rock band Incubus who had their classic song "Make Yourself." That sums up the way in which we understand. That's the air we breathe, the water we drink. You are what you make of yourself. That's your job in life, to make yourself, to make something of yourself, not to discover yourself. And that's a shift of meaning making. So meaning's no longer found out there somewhere. Meaning's found within me. I'm responsible for making meaning in my life. One of the consequences of this, or one of the outworkings of this, is that you no longer need an external plumb line to measure yourself against. There's no kind of external authority. So for a Christian, you say, well, you've got the Word of God, right? That's an external authority by which you measure yourself against. But when you make your own meaning, when the meaning making shifts to be something that happens within you, then you don't have and you don't require that external rule or plumb line or measurement by which you can assess yourself, because what happens is you've got everything you need to run your world. We've got everything we need to run our world without God. Again, it's not that we're saying you can't believe in God. There's fears of culture and society that would love to see that banned, right? But just thinking about the world we live in, it's not, again, that God is necessarily evil or necessarily needs to be excluded. It's just that God is necessarily dull, like irrelevant, unnecessary, because we have what we require to make meaning for ourselves as individuals, but also we can decide as a society what's best for society. We can do that based on our own experiences. We can shape not just ourselves, but we can also shape our society and this utopian idea of what society could truly be like. We have that power within us. So we stop looking up, as in we stop looking up to God, or we stop looking up to an external authority that's out there, an external measurement by which we might actually look and evaluate ourselves to go, how are we doing with this flourishing thing? And we start looking within. I was trying to think of a way to understand that for myself, right? Because I may have done it poorly, but there's a lot of deep thinking out there, which I've just glossed over, and which people like James Smith and David Williams and others do a much better job of diving into. So do check them out. But as I was thinking about it, I thought of the movie The Truman Show. You may have seen it. Jim Carrey, right? In this movie, The Truman Show, Truman Burbank is based. It's the first reality show, right? This is before Big Brother and MasterChef and Love Island or what? I don't know. I wouldn't have ever clicked Survivor. Perhaps is that a reality show? I don't know. But basically, Truman Burbank is the star of this reality TV show called The Truman Show. And so Truman is born into it. He doesn't even know, right? He doesn't know that he's the star. Everyone's in on it. It's a ratings hit, but he doesn't know. And he lives in this, his hometown is Sea Haven Island, and there's this complete set, right? It's this enormous dome that he lives within. And he begins his life within this giant dome, and he's isolated from the outside world. And in that dome, he's got his neighborhood, his streets, there's the beach. Everything exists for life in this dome. And through the course of the movie, he starts to get a bit suspicious, right? Like, this is a journey of discovery. And it's only when a spotlight falls from the sky, literally a spotlight falls from the sky, that he really starts to wonder if there actually might be more going on. Well, what Taylor's arguing is that with the shifting of time, with the shifting over time of what he calls plausibility structures, the pillars that kind of support the framework of what might even be considered believable or unbelievable, the things that make something believable, as they shift, we've arrived at a place where we've effectively put a dome over us. I think it's David Williams. I don't know if he's the original. He certainly talks about it. But we live under this dome, right? A dome that separates us from God and from anything spiritual. Okay, so it's a mental picture of trying to understand what living in this secular culture, this secular age, looks like. It's like living under a dome in which the God stuff is out there. Whether it exists or not is kind of irrelevant, but it's out there, and we live under the dome with all that we need for life and to get on with life. So I think David Williams summarizes it by saying that secularism, and he's referring to Secular 3, operates in, this is what he says, I've got it here, it's a quote. He says, secularism operates in a worldview that has by default excluded God. It focuses entirely on the here and now and excludes the above and beyond. Right? So another illustration, I was on a retreat, leadership development thing last year. I'm doing something called Arrow Leadership. There's a plug, Arrow. And they get along one of the legends, if you will, of Melbourne Anglicanism in the 70s and 80s, 90s, a guy called Peter Corney. So he came along and was having a bit of a chat, and he was unpacking some of this stuff. And he used an example which I thought was really helpful to understand the world that we live in and what's happened to us over time culturally, right? In terms of the dome and in terms of the God stuff being out there and irrelevant and not required, and being people that live under the dome, making meaning for ourselves, making our own rules, making society how we want it to be, etc. And he used the idea of the Melbourne Tennis Centre. If you've never been to the Melbourne Tennis Centre, it's not like it's a place you play tennis, right? So it's not like, I was going to really talk it up. It's a big tennis arena. So if you like tennis, anyway, one of the things that makes the Melbourne Tennis Centre unique, actually, that is pretty cool, is that it has a sliding roof, right? The roof can close. So in theory, the tennis can happen 24/7. Now it gets too hot, right? Because it's Australia. So that idea didn't work so wonderfully well, but it's great if it's raining. And so he says, picture this, right? Imagine you're in a really absorbing tennis match. For me, I think of the Australian Open semi-final that I watched between Pete Sampras and Andre Agassi. That's showing my age, right? Would have been better if I'd gone with, Nadal or Federer or something. But Sampras and Agassi, right? Semi-final for the ages. Imagine that you're totally absorbed in this epic tennis match. The rallies are extraordinary, going back and forth. There's one point in the corner, the racket's outstretched, scrapes it off over the net. Someone runs to the other side, manages to get it back. You're so absorbed in the game. It's a 5-set. It's so intense that you don't actually notice that the match referee has made a little call into his radio, and they've flicked the switch, and the roof has started to close. And it's only halfway through the set, when there's a change of ends and they go grab their towels, etc., that you look up and you realise the roof's completely closed, that we're in an indoor environment. That is kind of a good picture of what's happened, right? We've been so absorbed in the match, in trying to make sense of life and do stuff, that for many of us, the roof's been closed without us even realising it. The dome's come over us. God's stuff's been excluded, and it wasn't intentional. It's not because we set out to do it. It's just because it's just the outworking of the shifting, very slowly shifting tide of belief and what's possible and what isn't. And so, that's I think a really helpful picture of what it looks like for us now. We to live under a dome, right? The God stuff's out there, the normal stuff here, the stuff that, the everyday life stuff. And I'm not just talking about how we live, I'm talking about the way in which we make meaning and the way in which we understand life. David Williams, when he's talking about the dome, he says the dome works in different ways for different people. For the radical atheist, the dome's made of steel. There's nothing out there, nothing exists beyond the dome, but it doesn't need to be a steel one. It operates just as well with a glass dome. There may be something beyond the dome, but whatever it is, it's outside the skylights, or to use the Truman Show, outside the spotlights. It's beyond the glass ceiling. The point is that it's distant and separated and other. So whether you call yourself an atheist, an agnostic, however you might describe yourself, is in some senses irrelevant to the idea that whether you believe in God, whether you allow or not, whether you allow the possibility of God or not, that the other, the supernatural, to use that word, the spiritual, that's out there. That's beyond our existence of meaning making. It's irrelevant. So we don't need to think about it. And I think one of the workings of this is that it leads to a flattening, if you will, of reality. I think the Flatlands, check it out, right? It leads to a flattening of reality. There's no room for the transcendent, right? The transcendent is it's not that we don't want the transcendent, we do. It's just that the transcendent is no longer something that's expressed vertically. It's something that we look for horizontally. So the plausibility, or to use another word, the possibility of spiritual things has been worn away. Again, one more time, at least for this episode, right? David Williams, I think it's in his second article in the series. He says, living under the dome means excluding God from ordinary life. Living under the dome tells us that the here and now is all that matters, that there's nothing significant out there. So to live under the dome means living a life where all my significance, my purpose, it has to be found in the here and now, right? My freedom, my happiness is the greatest good. It's the way that I'll flourish is through me expressing myself and my happiness and my freedom in whatever way is truest for me. So the driving force in our search for meaning and making sense of the world can be summed up into the question, how does it make me feel? And that question, how does it make me feel, as opposed to what is true or how does it make me feel, actually drives how we make sense of the world that we live in. If meaning is located internally, if meaning is something that you create and make of yourself, rather than something that's external, or some sort of standard or code or plumb line by which we're measured against, something out there, then the inevitable way that we live in the world is to maximize our pursuit of pleasure and to minimize or avoid pain. Right? That becomes the dominant lens through which we view the world, through which we view our existence in the world. So I said it was the last time today, but it's clear I was lying. Clearly, I think David Williams is an inspirational. I don't want to use the genius, but like I heard him talk a number of years ago. He did a few lectures on this, and again, the link hopefully for that talk is in the description if we can find it. If you can, a quick Google should pull it up. He describes, and I wrote this in my notebook, right? He describes a plain pleasure culture as having a worldview where you make decisions based on what feels good to you and what makes you happy. Your identity as a pleasure seeker and a pain avoider. What does this look like? Right? Am I a pain avoider? Am I a pleasure seeker? He writes this in one of his articles. The voice of the pain pleasure culture sounds something like the therapist who insists, go for it, you're worth it, be true to yourself. Or the anti-therapist who says you're worthless, cut yourself and feel the pain. I was trying to think again how to kind of unpack that, or how to explain it, how to describe it. And just a few months ago, I was watching a movie in which I think the pain pleasure worldview is perfectly described. There's a movie called Don't Look Up. The movie stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence, right? And they play these two pretty low-level astronomers, and they discover that there's this giant comet hurtling towards planet Earth that will hit and will destroy the Earth in 6 months. Right? So they've got 6 months to get the news out. But no matter how hard they try, they actually can't seem to get the world to care. Like, there's a big cover-up, they go on media, it's laughed off. Like, nobody seems to care. And eventually, there's a plan made to destroy it. Eventually, people go, oh, maybe this is real, it's really happening. And they make this plan to destroy the asteroid, but the decision to destroy the asteroid is actually aborted when a tech billionaire, Peter Ishwal, discovers that the comet contains trillions of dollars worth of materials. So the plan to destroy the comet is aborted. And Leonardo DiCaprio's character, scientist Dr. Randall Mindy, he challenges Peter's just complete disregard for the scientific community and his reckless pursuit of profits, even at the expense of potentially destroying the Earth. Spoiler alert, the Earth gets destroyed. Not what you want to hear or see at the end of a movie. Still worth watching. And he confronts, in this big hangar, there's this scene where he confronts Peter Ishwal. And Peter Ishwal just takes him down, like just cuts him to the core. But listen to what he says, because I think this sums up what we've been talking about living under the dome, living as pain, pleasure people that avoid pain, pursue pleasure as the core meaning making of life and our reason for existence, right? This is gold. He says this, speaking to Leonardo DiCaprio's character, he says, I know what you are. I know who you are. My algorithms have determined 8 fundamental consumer profile types. He says, you are a lifestyle idealist. You think you're motivated by beliefs, high ethical beliefs, but you just run towards pleasure and away from pain, like a field mouse. think that perfectly describes how most of us live in our culture of hyper-expressive individualism. Whether we describe ourselves as people of faith or not, inevitably, our default, by virtue of the world, the cultural milieu, by virtue of the world that we live in, as people who live under the dome, we're people who run away from pain and run towards pleasure. And that takes place because we've been secularized, because the undercurrents of belief, what's plausible, has shifted over the time so that everything is challenged. It's not necessarily bad, but it does mean that over time, we've come to the conclusion as a culture that God is out there, that God isn't here, that God is out there somewhere. If there's a God, if there is, terrific. If there's not, terrific. The point is, it makes no difference. It's completely redundant. It's completely irrelevant. It's completely excluded from meaning making, from understanding who we are and making sense of the world we live in, making the most of our lives and living as people who truly want to flourish. God is no longer required for flourishing so long as you have you. And the outworking of that, the only way that makes sense then, if you focus on that and believe in that, is you're left with you and your life. And so the most logical thing in that then is to run away from pain and run towards pleasure, because your life is it. And you've got to make it count. So why make it a life full of pain? That makes no sense whatsoever. Make it a life that's full of pleasure and happiness, and pursue that, because that's what we've got. But we're going to explore, we're going to challenge it. Well, is that all there is? And what if the life outside the dome, this idea of spirituality and God and other, what if that can be reconnected and reconfigured into our present? Does that change how we make meaning? Does that change how we live? Does that change the way in which we engage the world and the kind of and how we understand ourselves within it? And I'm going to say that I think the answer to that is yes. So that's where we're going to leave it. First toes in the water. Hopefully I've whet your appetite. Check out some of James K. Smith's lectures online. I'm reading actually one of his books at the moment. I don't think I've got it with me. How to Inhabit Time. But he's got a heap of stuff on YouTube and other places that's super interesting. If you want, have a go at Charles Taylor's book. If that's too much, fair enough. Honestly, I read it and it was too much for me. Go with James K. Smith's How Not to Be Secular. Check out David Williams. I think this guy is an amazing thinker, really super helpful. And engage with that stuff. Let's think about it. And then when we come back for episode 2, I think we're going to dive in and kind of unpack, well, what does this mean for us? What does it mean to live in a pleasure pain world? What does that look like? How do we understand it? And then does it really hold up? Is it really the most logically coherent understanding of the world and making sense of the world? And the answer is no. Maybe there's a way of bringing what's outside the dome within the sphere of our existence and understanding. Maybe. Anyway, thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time.